The kitchen clock ticked like a heartbeat against the quiet. Every sound in that house, creaking wood, humming fridge, the soft sigh of the radiator felt louder now that there was no one left to fill the silence. James Carter wiped his hands on a faded towel, the same one his late wife Elaine used to fold neatly after dinner. Her absence still lived in the corners, the empty chair, the half-read book by the window, the untouched cup on the counter that had become a small memorial he couldn't bring himself to move. Brooklyn had changed. Or maybe he had. The neighborhood that once smelled of collard greens and Sunday jazz now echoed with construction noise and strangers who avoided eye contact. But his restaurant, Carter's Soul and Smoke, still stood 3 blocks away. It was more than food. It was memory. A place where laughter once sounded like family. He sat at the kitchen table, thumbing through old photos Elaine at the grand opening, smiling so wide her cheeks crinkled. Their son Michael in a graduation gown, his face full of promise. That was before the distance, before Lauren. The phone rang, jolting him out of thought. The number on the screen froze him for a second. Michael. It had been almost a year since they'd spoken. The last time ended with slammed doors and harsh words, Michael accusing him of holding him back, of being too proud to understand the real world. James had walked away before saying something he'd regret. He'd learned long ago that words said in anger leave scars deeper than fists. He hesitated, then pressed answer. "Dad." The voice on the other end was careful, almost fragile. "Yeah, it's me," James said quietly. "Didn't expect to hear from you." A pause, then a breath that sounded like relief. "I know. It's been too long. Michael swallowed. "Lauren and I were talking and we thought, maybe it's time we fix things. We want you to come for dinner tonight. Please." James blinked. "Tonight?" "Yeah. She's already cooking. Pot roast, just like Mom used to make." That last sentence hit him in the chest like a soft punch. Elaine's recipe, the same one she'd taught their son years ago, though he'd burned it every time he tried. "I don't know, son. It's short notice." "I know," Michael said quickly, "but we've wasted enough time being angry. I miss you, Dad. We both do." The words were right, but something about the tone gentle rehearsed felt slightly off. Still, hope is a powerful drug, and after a year of silence, even a half-truth felt like forgiveness. James looked around the kitchen one last time before saying, "Text me the address." When the message came through, he raised an eyebrow. Montclair, New Jersey. That was a world away from his Brooklyn block, a place where lawns were manicured and skin color decided whether neighbors smiled or locked their doors. He exhaled slowly. "Montclair, huh? You're moving up." Michael chuckled awkwardly. "Lauren's parents helped with the down payment. You'll see. It's beautiful. Just don't judge the zip code before you get here." James smiled faintly. "You forget who you're talking to. I've been judged my whole damn life." He hung up and sat in stillness, the weight of what family used to mean pressing against his ribs. He thought of Elaine's voice, steady, kind, always reminding him that time has a way of softening sharp edges. Maybe she was right. Maybe this dinner could heal something. He stood, reached for his best jacket. The dark gray one Elaine always said made him look like a pastor who knows how to dance. In the mirror, the reflection that looked back was older, grayer, but not yet broken. He picked up a bottle of bourbon aged 12 years, something expensive but not showy, and whispered to himself, "Peace offering, old man. No more ghosts tonight." Outside, the city lights painted his face in amber and blue as he locked the door and stepped into the cold. The Uber driver, a young Latina woman, smiled at him through the rearview mirror. "Montclair, right. Yeah," he said. "Visiting family. That's nice." "Haven't seen mine in 3 years," she said softly, pulling into traffic. Her words lingered. 3 years. James thought of the last hug he'd given Michael, stiff, awkward, half-hearted. It hadn't felt like a goodbye, but maybe it was. As the car crossed the George Washington Bridge, Manhattan shimmered like another planet, rich, bright, unreachable. The driver hummed to the radio a gospel tune he hadn't heard in years. He found himself mouthing the words without meaning to. When they entered Montclair, the streets widened. The houses grew whiter both in paint and in population. Every driveway gleamed with Teslas and imported SUVs. Lawns were flawless, trimmed like museum exhibits. "This your first time here?" the driver asked. "First and probably the last," James murmured. When the car stopped in front of a mansion with tall stone columns and a fountain that glimmered under floodlights, he just stared. The place looked like something out of a magazine, too perfect, too silent. The driver glanced back. "You sure this is the right address?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, my son lives here." She gave a polite smile that couldn't hide her surprise. "You must be proud." James didn't answer. Pride wasn't the word for what he felt, more like disbelief. He stepped out, shoes clicking against marble tiles that had never seen dirt. Before he could ring the doorbell, the heavy oak door opened. Lauren stood there, flawless in a cream-colored dress, her smile so polished it reflected light. "Mr. Carter," she said brightly. "Welcome. We're so glad you came." Behind her, through the glass, he caught a glimpse of Grace the housekeeper, a woman with deep brown skin and tired eyes that spoke more truth than any welcome could. For a split second, Grace's gaze met his, and something passed between them. A quiet warning, maybe, or recognition. James smiled politely, clutching the bourbon. "Good evening, Lauren." And as he crossed the threshold into the house of wealth, silence, and secrets, he couldn't shake the feeling that some invitations were never meant to be accepted. The night air smelled of pine and privilege. As James stepped through the doorway, a wave of artificial warmth wrapped around him, the kind that came from money, not people. The foyer stretched 2 stories high, gleaming marble floors, and a chandelier that looked like it could feed a family of 5 for a year. Every light was on every corner, polished to a shine that made him conscious of the scuffs on his shoes. "Michael's just setting the table." Lauren said, her voice soft but rehearsed. "You must be tired from the drive." "I've been on longer roads," James said, forcing a polite smile. She led him deeper into the house, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on the marble. The walls were lined with photographs, vacations in Santorini, skiing in Aspen, charity galas with names like the Montclair Heritage Foundation. He noticed something strange. Not one of those photos included him, not even from the wedding. It was as if history had been rewritten to begin after he stopped being convenient. Lauren noticed his gaze and said lightly, "We'll have to get a proper family portrait soon, one with you in it." Her tone was sweet, but the distance beneath it was colder than the tiles under his feet. From the dining room came the clatter of silver and a voice that still made his chest tighten. "Dad." Michael appeared in a tailored suit, sleeves rolled to the elbows, the picture of a man who belonged in this world. He hugged his father quickly, too quickly, then stepped back as if afraid the contact might leave a mark. "Good to see you, James," said his voice quiet. "You too," Michael replied, already moving toward the dining table. "Lauren's been working all day on this meal." "You're gonna love it." Lauren laughed. "Working all day I had help, remember?" Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen where a figure moved silently between counters. Grace the housekeeper. James caught a glimpse of her face as she set a dish down, dark skin gray threaded through her braids, hands cracked from detergent and time. Their eyes met again and she gave the smallest nod, one that said, "I see you." "Smells amazing," James said. Lauren smiled. "It's my mother's recipe, a little twist on the traditional pot roast." "Your mother white too," he almost said, but didn't. He'd learned to bite down on those words. Politeness had been his armor long before money became his son's. The dining room looked like a magazine spread. The table gleamed under soft amber light set for 3. Silver cutlery lined up like soldiers. Crystal glasses waiting for something expensive enough to prove taste. James placed his bourbon bottle gently on the table. "Brought this. Thought it might pair well." Michael's eyes lit up. "Dad, that's top shelf stuff. You didn't have to." "I wanted to," James said, then added, "Thought we could make a toast. To new starts." Lauren clapped her hands together softly. "That's perfect." But even as she smiled, her gaze darted toward Michael. They shared a look too brief to catch, but not brief enough to ignore. James eased into his chair, the one directly across from Lauren, with Michael between them like a referee. The seat was soft, too soft, and he sank slightly lower than the others. A small thing, but it felt symbolic, like the universe reminding him where he stood. As conversation began, Lauren led with questions that sounded warm but were shaped like knives. "So how's business been? Still running those, what do you call them, soul restaurants?" James smiled faintly. "Soul food, yeah. Been running them for 25 years. That's incredible," she said, her tone just a shade too surprised. "So, mostly Southern food, fried chicken and mac and cheese, collard greens, cornbread, the whole deal," he finished for her. "Comfort food," Michael added quickly. "Dad's famous for it." Lauren's eyes flickered amused. It must be nice doing something so nostalgic. James looked at her and smiled politely. "It's not nostalgia when you're feeding real people." Her smile froze for a beat before she looked away. The tension softened when Michael started talking about the neighborhood property values, renovations, networking events. He sounded like a man selling a dream he barely believed in. James nodded through it all, but his thoughts wandered. He looked around the room at the whiteness of everything, the walls, the dishes, even the flowers. It wasn't just color. It was the absence of story. Nothing here had fingerprints, wear, or warmth, just perfection, the kind that cost souls to maintain. Grace moved silently between courses. Once, as she leaned over to refill his glass, he caught sight of faint scars on her wrist. Old burns, healed but still visible. She avoided his eyes this time. That silence said more than words ever could. When she disappeared back into the kitchen, Lauren sighed dramatically. "She's a blessing, really. Best housekeeper we've had. Doesn't complain, works long hours always, so obedient." James turned his glass slowly. "Obedience, an interesting word." Lauren blinked. "Oh, I didn't mean, I know what you meant," he said quietly, not looking at her. Michael shifted in his seat. "Dad, you'll like Grace. She's great. We treat her like family." "Do you?" James asked. "She eat at this table." The silence that followed was short but heavy. Lauren recovered first, laughing a little too brightly. "You have your father's sense of humor, Michael." "No," James said calmly. "He doesn't." Lauren's smile vanished. For a long moment the only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier. James felt something deep inside, not anger, not sadness, but the dull ache of recognition. He'd spent his whole life sitting at tables like this, places where he was invited but never quite welcomed, places that used his presence to prove they weren't prejudiced, then dismissed his truth the moment it made them uncomfortable. When the main course arrived, the pot roast smelled just like Elaine's, and that hurt most of all. The memories it stirred, the warmth it pretended to bring, the way it masked something cold underneath. Michael lifted his glass. "To family," he said. "To forgiveness." James hesitated, then lifted his own. Lauren's voice was soft, melodic. "And to new beginnings." The glasses touched with a faint chime. As he sipped, James caught sight of Grace again through the kitchen doorway. Her face was pale. Her hands trembled as she reached for a plate. When their eyes met this time, there was no mistaking the message. Something was wrong. And for the first time that night, James Carter realized that dinner might not be about forgiveness at all. The clink of silverware echoed softly against the tension. Lauren's laughter filled the dining room like a perfume, pleasant at first, then suffocating the longer it lingered. She was elegance made flesh, every movement measured, every word sculpted to sound effortless. Yet beneath that practiced warmth, James sensed something hollow, something that didn't belong to sincerity, but to performance. "So Michael tells me you built your first restaurant from scratch," she said, slicing into her pot roast with delicate precision. "That must have been challenging." James smiled faintly. "That's a polite way to say impossible." Lauren's eyes widened in mock innocence. "Oh, not at all. I just mean it couldn't have been easy back then. You know, the 80s. Different times." "Different, yeah," James said quietly. "Harder to get loans, harder to get landlords to rent to you if your skin didn't match their comfort zone." Michael cleared his throat. "Dad?" "It's all right," James interrupted, never looking away from Lauren. "She's right. It was different. People like me had to build our own tables because no one would offer us a seat." Lauren set her fork down gently, her eyes flicking toward Michael. "I didn't mean anything by it." "You did. James said softly, then smiled to take the sting out of it. But that's all right. Most people don't realize when they do. The silence stretched thick as syrup. Even the chandelier light seemed to dim under its weight. Then, as if on cue, Michael laughed too loudly. "You two are something else, always turning dinner into a debate." Grace appeared then, silent as a shadow, to clear the plates. Her hands shook slightly enough for a fork to rattle against the dish. Lauren's smile vanished like a mask slipping. "Grace," she said, her tone sugar-coated but sharp at the edges. "Try to be careful, please. These are imported." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Grace murmured, keeping her eyes down. James watched the exchange with quiet disapproval. The way Lauren called her ma'am but spoke to her like a child. The way Michael looked away, pretending not to notice. He'd seen this theater too many times before, kindness worn like jewelry meant to shine under judgment, not endure under scrutiny. When Grace reached for his plate, James placed a gentle hand over hers. "No rush, sweetheart," he said softly. "Take your time." Her eyes flicked up for just a moment, gratitude and warning all tangled together. Then she nodded and slipped back toward the kitchen. Lauren poured more wine. "You have such a way with people, Mr. Carter. Comes from feeding folks who've had to earn every smile they get," he said. "You learn how to see when someone's hurting." She smiled too brightly. "That's very poetic." "It's survival," he replied. Michael shifted uneasy. "Dad, you still working the same hours? You should be thinking about retirement. Retirement's for people who stop mattering," James said. "I'm not there yet." Lauren tilted her head. "But you could enjoy life more, don't you think, travel? Let someone younger take over. Michael told me you own all 7 restaurants outright." James froze for half a second. "He did, huh?" Her smile didn't falter. "That's incredible. Such a legacy. You must be proud." "Pride's expensive," he said, his tone cooling. "Costs more than people think." She took another sip of wine, unfazed. "Still, Michael says you've built something worth protecting." "That's rare. I built something worth earning," he corrected. Something in Lauren's expression shifted, an almost imperceptible flicker of calculation. Michael looked down at his plate, pretending to adjust his cufflinks. The air thickened. James suddenly felt the walls closing in the marble, the portraits, the gold-framed mirrors. They weren't decorations. They were statements, each one whispering, "You don't belong here." He thought of Elaine, then how she'd warned him the world could change your child faster than love could save them. The higher they climb, she'd said, the more they forget the ground they came from. He took a slow sip of water, his throat dry, despite the chill in the air. Lauren's voice softened. "I know tonight must feel strange, but it's good to have family together again. Family." The word landed wrong. It had too much polish, not enough truth. "Funny thing about family," James said. "It's the only thing that can both heal you and kill you, depending on who's holding the knife." Michael exhaled sharply. "Dad, come on." But Lauren only smiled again, her eyes glimmering under the chandelier. "You have a dark sense of humor, Mr. Carter." He looked at her and said, "You'd be surprised how often humor's the only thing keeping us alive." Then a sound broke through the faint buzz of his phone in his pocket. James glanced down discreetly. A text from an unknown number. He slid it open under the table, his pulse spiking as he read, "Get up. Leave now. Don't drink anything. Don't say a word." He blinked, reading it twice, the words burning into him. Across the table, Lauren was still smiling. Michael was pouring more wine into his father's glass. And from the kitchen through the half-open door, Grace stood frozen in the shadows, her eyes locked on him. James forced his breath steady. "Just a message from one of my managers," he muttered, pocketing the phone. Michael nodded. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," James said. "Everything's just fine." But his hand trembled slightly as he lifted the glass to his lips, stopping only when Grace moved suddenly, almost imperceptibly, shaking her head no. He set the glass down without drinking. The laughter resumed. The conversation flowed, but everything had changed. The air felt heavier. The walls seemed closer. Every smile in that room was too perfect, too polished. And behind each one, he could feel the edge of something sharp, something waiting for him to lower his guard. The night deepened, but the light inside the house refused to soften. It glowed too bright, too deliberate, like a stage light aimed at faces pretending to be family. James sat at the table, posture straight, palms resting lightly against the linen napkin on his lap. Across from him, Lauren glided between courses like a performer who'd rehearsed every smile, every gesture. Michael spoke in bursts, his voice just a little too cheerful, as if he were afraid silence might expose something. "Dad, remember that old Buick you had?" "The blue one," Michael grinned, pouring another glass of wine. "You used to blast jazz so loud the neighbors complained." James smiled faintly. "I still have that Buick. Doesn't run like it used to, but neither do I." Lauren laughed politely, though her eyes flicked toward the clock above the mantel. It was subtle, half a second, but James caught it. She was timing something. The air felt different now, thicker. Every sound in the house, the ticking clock, the faint hum of the fridge echoed like it was amplified through glass. Michael pushed the conversation forward, nervous energy crackling in his voice. "You ever think about selling the restaurants, Dad? Maybe cashing out while business is good?" James tilted his head. "You asking as a son or an investor?" Lauren's lips curved. "He just worries about you, that's all. You've worked so hard for so long. Don't you think it's time someone else carried the load?" James folded his hands slowly. "You mean someone like you? Or Michael?" she said easily. "Family, right? Who better to take care of your legacy? That word again, family." It rolled off her tongue like sugar, but James heard the steel underneath. He leaned back, studying the two of them. The distance between them wasn't measured in inches. It was measured in intent. "Funny," he said. "When I started my first restaurant, no bank wanted to touch me. Too risky, they said. Too urban. I had to borrow from a friend, paint the walls myself, fry the first batch of chicken with a pan I brought from home." Lauren smiled thinly. "A beautiful story of perseverance." "Yeah," he said softly. "Funny how people love perseverance stories, just not the people who lived them." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was surgical, precise. Lauren reached for her glass of wine, her hand steady, her tone serene. "You must be proud of how far Michael's come. You gave him such a strong foundation." James looked at his son. "I gave him everything I had." Michael's eyes darted away. "And I'm grateful for that." "Are you?" James asked. "Because sometimes it feels like the only thing I gave you that you kept was my name." The words hung between them like smoke. Grace entered the room again, carrying a tray with small dishes of dessert chocolate soufflés that steamed faintly in the light. Her face looked drawn, her eyes darker than before. When she placed one in front of James, her hand brushed the tablecloth. Her fingertips tapped twice against the wood. Then once more. A code, a rhythm, a warning. James glanced at her, but she was already retreating toward the kitchen. Lauren's voice snapped through the air. "Grace, a little faster, please." "Yes, ma'am." Grace murmured, her shoulders tightening. Something about the way Lauren said ma'am, that bright, empty politeness, made James's chest tighten. He'd heard that tone his entire life. The one that said, "I'm smiling because I can afford to." He watched the steam rise from his dessert curling upward like a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Lauren broke the silence. "So, Mr. Carter, do you ever think about expanding beyond New York, maybe opening a Carter's Soul and Smoke here in Montclair?" He met her gaze evenly. "Montclair doesn't eat where I cook." The air stilled. Even the chandelier seemed to flicker. Lauren's smile froze, then reassembled itself with forced charm. "Well, that's a shame. I'm sure the people here would love your food." "No," James said quietly. "They'd like the story of it. The struggle, the seasoning, but not the people who made it possible." Michael rubbed his temples. "Dad, can we not?" "Can we not?" What? James interrupted. "Talk about the truth," Lauren sighed, reaching across to pat Michael's hand. "He's just tired. Long drive, old memories." But James wasn't tired. He was awake in a way he hadn't been in years, every detail around him. The flick of Lauren's eyes toward the clock again, the untouched soufflé in front of her. The faint tremor in Michael's hand was sharper now. Something was wrong, and Grace knew it. James straightened. "Mind if I stretch my legs? Long drive's catching up to me." Of course, Lauren said quickly, too. Quickly. Second door on the left, bathroom's just down the hall. He nodded, pushing his chair back. Appreciate it. As he stood, Michael said, "You okay, Dad?" "I'm fine," he said. "Just need a minute." He walked down the hallway, the house unnaturally quiet, except for his footsteps. The paintings on the wall, portraits of strangers with cold eyes, seemed to watch him pass. The smell of perfume and bleach mingled faintly in the air. At the end of the hall, he paused. The second door on the left led to a small powder room, its light spilling faintly through a crack. But through the opposite doorway, a faint sound water running metal clinking drifted from the kitchen. He turned right. Grace stood at the sink, washing crystal glasses with quick mechanical motions. She didn't look up, but her voice trembled when she spoke. "You shouldn't be here. They told me the bathroom was left," James said quietly. "They told you a lot tonight," she whispered. "None of it true." He took a step closer. "That text. It was you, wasn't it?" Her hands froze. Water dripped from the sponge, hitting the sink like ticking seconds. Then she nodded once, barely perceptible. "They put something in your drink," she said. "Don't go back to the table." James felt a coldness crawl through his chest. "Why are you helping me?" Grace looked up, finally her eyes wet but steady. "Because I know what it's like to be seen as less. And I'm tired of watching good people pay for other people's greed." Their eyes locked, two lives divided by circumstance, united by survival. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Lauren's voice floated closer. "Mr. Carter." "Everything all right?" Grace mouthed one word. "Go." James glanced toward the back door, an exit half hidden behind a curtain. His pulse thundered in his ears. Mr. Carter Lauren called again, closer now. He slipped quietly toward the door, hand gripping the knob. The air outside smelled of cold grass and rain. He turned the handle, the faintest creak cutting through the stillness. And as he stepped into the night, he realized this dinner wasn't just about family, it was about survival. The cold night air hit James like a slap. He stepped out into the garden, his breath visible under the glow of manicured lights. Behind him, the house stood still, a monument to wealth and secrets. Every window shone too bright, too watchful. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a trap with good taste. He moved quickly across the grass, careful not to disturb the gravel path. The gate at the back of the yard loomed ahead, a wrought iron promise of escape. But his hand hesitated on the latch. For a moment he glanced back at the mansion. His son was still in there. 1,000 memories crashed in at once. Michael learning to ride a bike. Michael's first day at school. Michael crying after his first loss on the basketball court. Each one clashed with the image of the man at that dinner table smiling while pouring poisoned wine. James's throat tightened. "Lord, don't let this be what I think it is," he muttered under his breath. He opened the gate and stepped into the quiet street beyond. The world outside felt too calm for what he'd just escaped. Crickets hummed lazily. Somewhere a sprinkler hissed to life. He walked fast, pulling his phone from his jacket pocket. The message still glowed on the screen. "Get up. Leave now. Don't drink anything. Don't say a word. No name. No number saved. Just those words as sharp and cold as the night itself." He scrolled again, looking for clues. Area code digits, anything. Nothing familiar. Then the phone buzzed again. "Keep walking. Don't go back. They noticed you stopped drinking." James froze mid-step. His heart hammered so hard it blurred his thoughts. He looked up and down the street, empty, except for the long shadows cast by lampposts. His instinct screamed to move. He started walking again, this time, toward the corner, where the glow of a streetlight promised visibility safety. Another buzz. 5 houses down. Silver sedan waiting. "Don't ask questions. Get in." He hesitated. Every caution he'd learned in 60 years of living as a black man in America flared at once. He'd survived too much to trust shadows or strangers. Then he remembered Grace's eyes. That silent plea. He walked. Each step felt heavier. The air itself seemed to vibrate with unseen danger. When he reached the silver sedan, the window rolled down an inch. A woman's voice, low, hurried, familiar, spoke from the dark interior. "Mr. Carter, it's me. Grace, get in." He leaned closer, relief flooding him. Grace, you how? No time, she whispered. Please, they'll check soon. Get in. He slipped into the passenger seat. The car smelled faintly of bleach and fear. Grace's hands trembled on the steering wheel as she pulled away from the curb. Talk, James said quietly. What's going on? They planned it for weeks, she said, her accent trembling through exhaustion. Your son owes a lot of money to the kind of people who don't wait politely. His wife found out and she convinced him you were the solution. James blinked. The solution? They wanted you to sign papers, power of attorney, transfer of assets, everything. He sat back, the weight of her words crashing over him. And the drink Lauren did research, Grace said softly. A sedative that makes you confused, suggestible. Not deadly, but enough to make you forget signing something. The world tilted. My own son James whispered. He was gonna... Grace's voice broke. He didn't fight her, Mr. Carter. He agreed. They said it was your turn to give back. James turned toward her. And you? Why warn me? Because I've been them, she said. Not rich, but scared. Scared enough to do what I'm told. I've cleaned houses for people like them all my life. People who call me family when guests are watching, but won't say my name when I'm not in uniform. I couldn't let another good man die for their comfort. For a long time, James said nothing. The streetlights rolled by in silence, painting their faces in fragments, her determination, his disbelief. You risked your job, he finally said. Maybe worse. Grace gave a small, bitter laugh. What's one more lost job to a woman who's already invisible? They drove for several blocks before James found his voice again. How do you know all this? How deep are you in it? I clean everything, she said simply, including the office where Lauren keeps her documents. I saw them, your name, your signature's already forged. I heard their calls. They talked about you like you were a wallet with a pulse. James gripped the edge of the seat. His hands trembled not from fear, but rage, a slow, controlled burn. When tonight, Grace said, they plan to make you sign after dessert. He exhaled, shaking his head. And you sent the text. She nodded. I used Lauren's tablet while she wasn't looking. I found your number from a business card she kept. You were never supposed to see me again after that. He studied her in the dim light. The lines on her face told stories she hadn't spoken, years of silence, humiliation, survival. You saved my life. Grace's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I just did what no one ever did for me. The car slowed as they reached a dimly lit corner of Montclair's main road. James glanced at her, voice firm now. You can't go back there. I know, she said. They'll realize soon I'm gone. Then you come with me, he said. Brooklyn. I'll make sure you're safe. Grace shook her head. No, sir. You've got to protect yourself first. They won't stop. Lauren's smart and desperate. The phone buzzed again. A new message. Not from Grace. You left. Big mistake, Dad. Come back now before things get worse. James's stomach dropped. Michael. Another message followed instantly. We just wanted to talk. You misunderstood. Please come back. Grace's eyes darted toward him. They know you're gone. He stared at the glowing screen. Yeah, and they're scared. He deleted the message without replying. Then he looked out the window, his reflection layered against the passing lights of Montclair's pristine streets. For years he'd believed the distance between him and his son was about money pride or time. Now he understood the truth. It was about shame. Michael's shame of where he came from, and James's shame for not seeing what it cost to belong in someone else's world. As the car merged toward the highway, Grace whispered, What will you do? James stared straight ahead, his voice steady. Go home, then make sure they never hurt anyone again. For the first time that night, he didn't sound afraid. He sounded like a man who'd already buried fear long ago. By the time they reached the edge of Montclair, the streetlights behind them had begun to blur into fog. Grace slowed the car and turned onto a narrow side street, parking beneath the shadow of a large oak. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. It was the silence of two people trying to breathe after nearly drowning. James sat motionless, staring at the reflection of his own face in the windshield. "You said the papers were ready?" he murmured. "What kind of papers?" Grace swallowed hard. "Power of attorney. Full transfer. It would have given your son access to your restaurants, your accounts, everything." James leaned back, his pulse steady, but his jaw tight. "And they plan to make me sign under the drug." "Yes." Her voice trembled. "Lauren said it would smooth things out. Said you'd be grateful once it was done." He closed his eyes, and for a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the car's engine. "I spent my whole life building something honest," he said finally. "My son didn't need to inherit my business. He just needed to inherit my backbone." Grace's voice softened. "Maybe he lost it trying to prove he belonged." James turned to her sharply. "Belonged to who?" "To them," she said. "People like Lauren. People who smile while measuring your worth in square footage and skin tone." Her words landed like stones. He wanted to argue to defend his son from her truth, but he couldn't. He'd seen the same sickness before, the quiet infection of ambition that made people trade their roots for acceptance. It wasn't just betrayal, it was assimilation with interest. He rubbed a hand over his face. "You've seen a lot, haven't you?" Grace nodded. "Enough to know that survival makes hypocrites of good people." A gust of wind shook the branches above, scattering leaves across the hood. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, faint but growing louder. Grace straightened instantly. They might have called the police. James frowned. "For what? I haven't done anything." "They don't need truth, Mr. Carter," she said bitterly. "They just need power, and they still have plenty of that." The siren faded, turning down another street. Grace exhaled, shoulders loosening. "You should go home now. They won't risk following you tonight, but they'll come after what you built." James studied her face, strong, tired, lined by years of invisible labor. "You said you've worked for people like them before." "All my life," she said. "White houses, perfect families, polite cruelty." "Why stay?" She smiled sadly. "Because polite cruelty still pays rent." Her answer hit harder than she probably intended. It was the kind of truth he'd heard 1,000 times and still wasn't immune to. Poverty wasn't a lack of money, it was a lack of options. He sighed, glancing toward the quiet street. "You got somewhere safe tonight." She hesitated. "I'll find somewhere." "That's not an answer." Her lips tightened, and for a moment she looked like she might argue. Then she shook her head. "There's a friend in Newark. She rents a room." James nodded slowly. "I'll call you tomorrow. We'll figure out what comes next." Grace blinked, surprised. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Carter." "I do," he said. "You warned me when you could have kept quiet. You could have walked away." She met his gaze. "You looked like my father when you came through that door. Proud. Alone. I couldn't let them destroy that." He swallowed hard, turning away before emotion betrayed him. "You should go before they realize you're gone." Grace put the car in gear, then stopped again. "They'll say things," she warned. "Make it sound like you imagined it, that you were confused. They'll make you question your own memory." James smiled grimly. "They'll try." As she drove off into the night, her taillights faded into red ghosts down the empty road. He stood for a long time, the chill cutting through his jacket. The air smelled of rain and regret. When he finally called an Uber back to Brooklyn, his hands still trembled, but not from fear. It was anger now, controlled, cold, and deliberate. The driver didn't speak much. A young man with brown skin and kind eyes humming faintly to the rhythm of a gospel tune on the radio. James found comfort in the quiet humanity of it. Halfway across the bridge, the city lights stretched before them like a promise. "Rough night," the driver asked softly. "You could say that," James said. "Family dinner gone wrong." The driver chuckled. "Ain't that most family dinners?" James smiled weakly. This one was special. When the car finally stopped in front of his house, the streets of Brooklyn felt smaller, more honest. The chipped paint, the cracked sidewalk, these were the imperfections that told the truth. Inside, he sat at his kitchen table, the same table where Elaine used to read the morning paper. The bottle of bourbon he'd brought to Montclair sat unopened beside him. He poured a small glass not for celebration, but for clarity. The liquid caught the light, rich and amber. He stared into it, seeing the reflection of his own tired face. He picked up his phone and scrolled through the messages again, the warnings, the threats, the silence that followed. Then he opened a new note and began typing. "If anything happens to me, look to my son and his wife. The name is Lauren Whitmore. The motive is debt and pride." He saved it under a folder labeled, "Just in case." Outside, rain began to fall, a steady rhythm against the window. He let it play like a soundtrack to his thoughts. Each drop seemed to echo something Elaine once told him. "The people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you most, because they know where you hide your faith." His phone buzzed again. A new message. Same unknown number. "They're not done. Don't go near them alone. Tomorrow everything changes." He stared at the screen, the letters glowing cold against the dark. Then he set the phone down, looked out into the rain, and whispered, "Tomorrow's fine. I've been changing my whole damn life." By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the city slick and silent. Brooklyn smelled of wet asphalt and burnt coffee, the kind of morning that feels like starting over. But James Carter wasn't starting over. He was planning. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dining room, the white plates, the wine glasses Grace's trembling hands. He saw Michael's face, too smiling with the same mouth that once called him Daddy, the same eyes that now measured him in dollar signs. By 8:00 a.m., his mind was already set. He called his lawyer first, a quiet man named Isaac Thomas, who had been with him since the first Carter's Soul and Smoke opened. "Isaac," he said calmly, "I need to make some changes to my will, and I need them done before noon." There was a pause. "James, that's short notice. Life's short, brother. And lately mine's been getting shorter." Isaac didn't ask questions. He'd seen enough of James's life to know when not to. They arranged to meet in his downtown office by mid-morning. Before leaving, James opened the small drawer near the sink, the one Elaine used to call her truth drawer. Inside were family photos, receipts, and a faded envelope labeled Michael's first paycheck. He ran his fingers over the handwriting. Elaine's looping script, still alive in ink, if nowhere else. He tucked the photo of her and Michael at graduation into his jacket pocket, not because he needed the memory, but because he needed the strength. Then he left. The train ride into Manhattan was slow and crowded, filled with the kind of people who looked invisible in neighborhoods like Montclair. Construction workers, nurses, janitors, young mothers, holding toddlers with half-closed eyes. People who survived not by scheming but by working. James sat among them and felt more at home here than he had in that marble mansion. At the next stop, a teenage boy wearing a delivery uniform sat across from him, nodding to the beat in his headphones. James noticed the boy's hands, rough-cracked familiar. He saw himself at 17, hustling double shifts, saving coins for a dream no one else believed in. The boy looked up and caught him staring. James smiled. "Don't lose those hands," he said quietly. The kid frowned. "Sir, those hands, they'll build something no one can take from you." Before the boy could answer, the train screeched into the next station and the crowd shifted. James got off the boy's confused expression, fading into the blur of commuters. Isaac's office overlooked Lower Manhattan, all glass, concrete, and ambition. When James walked in, Isaac rose immediately. "You look tired," he said. "Everything all right?" "Not yet," James replied, "but it will be." He laid out everything, the dinner, the drug, the documents, the warning. Isaac listened, face tightening with every detail. When James finished, he sat back stunned. "Jesus, James, your own son?" James exhaled slowly. "My own son. I'll draft the protection orders immediately," Isaac said. "We'll lock your assets, block any access until this is settled. You'll need to contact the police, too." "I will," James said, "but not yet." "Why not?" "Because I want to hear him lie to my face first." Isaac studied him, then nodded. "You always were the calm kind of angry." "I learned from the best," James said, thinking of Elaine. By late afternoon, the clouds had rolled back in heavy and gray. James stood outside his restaurant on Atlantic Avenue watching the staff prepare for dinner service. The smell of fried chicken, sweet corn, and barbecue drifted out the door smells that once defined home. He wasn't supposed to be here. But something in him needed the grounding, needed to see that not everything he'd built had turned rotten. "Mr. Carter," a voice called behind him. It was Denise, his manager. "You all right, boss? You look like you're carrying the whole city on your back." "Maybe I am," he said softly. "Maybe it's time I put some of it down." She frowned. "You sure you don't want to sit, get a plate?" He shook his head. "Not yet. I've got one more thing to do tonight." As he turned to leave, she touched his arm. "You're a good man, Mr. Carter. Whatever's going on, don't let it make you bitter." He smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Denise. Bitterness is a luxury. I can't afford it." That evening back in Brooklyn, the streetlights hummed to life. James sat by his window with his bourbon glass half full. He wasn't waiting for courage. He already had that. He was waiting for the moment anger and fear balanced perfectly, a moment when he could act without shaking. It came at 7:00 p.m. when his phone lit up again. "Dad, please, I made a mistake. We just need to talk. Come back tonight. I'll explain everything. Michael." James stared at the screen for a long time. His thumb hovered over delete, then stopped. He typed only 2 words in response: "I'm coming." He grabbed his coat, tucked Elaine's photo deeper into his pocket, and stepped into the night. The cab ride to Montclair felt shorter this time. Maybe because there was no confusion left, only clarity sharpened by betrayal. The driver, a middle-aged black man with salt and pepper hair, glanced at him through the mirror. "You visiting family?" "Something like that," James said. "Family'll be the death of us, brother," the driver muttered. "Trust me. I got 2 kids. Half my gray hairs are named after them." James smiled faintly. "Yeah, mine too." As the car rolled through Montclair's pristine streets, he saw the mansion ahead glowing under the soft white light of privilege. He could almost hear Elaine's voice beside him. You can't fix someone who doesn't think they're broken. Maybe not. But he could stop pretending nothing was. He paid the driver and stepped out. The night smelled of wet grass and fear. The house loomed perfect as before its windows flickering gold like eyes that never blinked. He walked up the driveway slowly, each step deliberate. The bourbon bottle was gone, replaced by resolve. At the door he hesitated, then pressed the bell. Footsteps approached. A pause. Then the lock clicked. When the door opened, Michael stood there, eyes bloodshot, voice trembling with false relief. "Dad," he said, "thank God you came." James looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then he said, "We need to talk about what family really means." And as the door shut behind them, the night swallowed their voices. The mansion looked different this time. Not brighter, not darker, just hollow like the soul had been vacuum sealed out of it. Every lamp was on, every candle lit, but the warmth was fake. James could feel it the moment he stepped inside. "Come in, Dad," Michael said, forcing a smile. "Lauren's resting upstairs. She's been sick over this whole misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," James repeated, his tone even. "That what we're calling it now?" Michael shut the door behind him. The click echoed like a gavel. "Dad, please. You left so fast last night we didn't get to explain." "Grace, she lied to you. She's been stealing from us." James turned slowly. "Son, you should have gone with something more believable. That woman doesn't have $2 to rub together." Michael's jaw tightened. "You don't know her like we do. I know courage when I see it," James said, "and I know fear when I hear it. Yours sounds an awful lot like the second one." Michael looked away, shoulders hunched. "Dad, I made mistakes. I gambled okay, but I was going to fix it before I— "What?" James asked. "Before I realized my own son tried to poison me, before I signed my name on papers you forged." Michael's face twisted. "It wasn't supposed to be like that. Lauren said the drug just makes you calm, easier to talk to. So that's what we're calling drugging an old man now," James said quietly. Making conversation easier. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. They stood in the middle of the foyer, the sound of the grandfather clock marking each second like a countdown. The same walls that had hosted polite laughter yesterday now held ghosts. James studied his son the way the expensive suit hung loose, the way sweat gleamed at his temple. The boy who once scraped his knees on Brooklyn asphalt was gone. In his place stood a man dressed in guilt and debt. "Why?" James asked finally. "You had a chance to build your own life. Why take mine?" Michael's voice cracked. "Because I was tired, Dad. Tired of watching you being the exception." The world loved you for being the one black man they could point to and say, "See, he made it, so the system must be fair." James's eyes narrowed. "And that's my fault." "You never saw how hard it was for me," Michael shot back, "trying to fit into Lauren's world. Her parents, her friends, they smile, but they never forget what I am. I wanted to give her a life they couldn't look down on. But every time I tried, I saw your name on the billboards, your restaurants, your face on the cover of community magazines. I couldn't compete with a ghost, so you decided to bury it," James said softly. Michael's breathing quickened. "I just wanted to stop feeling like a charity case, like I married up but was born down." "That's not how worth works," James said. "That's how shame works." Michael's hands trembled. "You don't understand what it's like to live between two worlds. Too black for her side, too polished for yours. I understand better than you think," James said. "Difference is, I didn't burn the bridge between them." Footsteps creaked from the stairs. Lauren appeared wrapped in a silk robe, eyes swollen but sharp. "James," she said softly, "please sit. Let's talk like family." "I think we passed that exit a few miles back," he said. Michael told me everything, she continued. "He's sick with guilt. But you have to believe we didn't want to hurt you. We just needed a little help." "Help," James said. "Help doesn't come with sedatives." Lauren's lips quivered, but her eyes remained calculating. "We were desperate. Those men he owes, they're dangerous. If you'd just signed, no one would have gotten hurt." James took a step closer, voice low. "And after that, when I realized I'd lost everything I built, what then? You send flowers to the funeral. Post a nice quote about forgiveness." Lauren's mask slipped. "You think your name means anything out there, James? Those restaurants exist because people like us invest in neighborhoods like yours. You should be grateful your legacy was even worth stealing." Michael winced. Lauren, stop. But she didn't. "You think you're better because you worked hard. Every man of color who claws his way up thinks he's the exception. You're not. You're just a token that got lucky." James stared at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he said, "And you're the reason luck runs out." He turned back to Michael. "You chose this." "I chose survival," Michael said weakly. "No," James replied. "You chose surrender." From outside came the distant hum of engines, tires crunching gravel. Lauren stiffened. "They're here." James frowned. Before either could answer, a car door slammed. Then another. 3 shadows crossed the frosted glass of the front window. Heavy footsteps approached. Michael's face went pale. "Dad, you have to go. Please, go where James asked. This your mess. If they see you here, they'll add me to your debt." Lauren grabbed Michael's arm. "We can fix this. Tell them the money's coming." "That your father's agreed." The knock came hard, impatient. Then again, louder. Lauren's voice trembled. "Michael, answer it." He hesitated. Then he turned to his father. "Don't say anything. Please." James didn't move. He just folded his hands behind his back, watching. Michael opened the door. 3 men stood outside, dark coats, darker expressions. The tallest stepped forward, his accent clipped and cold. "Mr. Miller," he said, "we were told payment would be ready tonight." Michael's voice cracked. "I just need more time." "Time," the man repeated. "You had time." The second man's gaze drifted past Michael to James. Him. Lauren's breath caught. "No, that's—" "Yes," James interrupted. "That's me. The man you're waiting for." The leader tilted his head. "You're the father." "Yeah," James said, "and the reason he's alive right now." For a heartbeat the men exchanged glances. Then the leader smirked. "You came to settle his debt." James smiled faintly. "Not exactly. I came to end it." Michael's voice rose. "Dad, please don't." James raised a hand. "Enough. I've been cleaning up your messes since you were 10 years old. This time I'm making sure you can't make another." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope the new will Isaac had drafted that morning. He handed it to the lead man. "Everything I own is locked behind legal walls now. He can't sell, borrow, or steal another dime. You want your money, take it from him. But leave my name out of it." The man opened the envelope, scanning the first page, then smiled. "You're a bold one, old man." James stepped forward until they were inches apart. Bold built 7 restaurants. Stupid builds prisons. The man studied him for a moment longer, then laughed. I like you, Mr. Carter. Too bad your son isn't half as strong. They turned and walked away, their laughter fading into the night. When the door closed, the silence was unbearable. Michael sank to the floor, shaking. Lauren stood frozen, hatred and fear twisting her face. James looked down at them both. You wanted power, he said quietly. Now you've got none. And with that he turned and walked out the door, leaving the mansion and his son's excuses behind. The drive back to Brooklyn felt longer this time. The rain had returned, falling in soft, deliberate sheets, drumming on the roof, like a reminder. Nothing washes away as easily as you hope it will. James sat in the back seat of the cab, watching the city blur by lights, faces and fragments of a world that had always demanded more of him than it gave back. The driver hummed quietly to an old Sam Cooke tune, and for a moment the music steadied him. A change is gonna come. Yeah, maybe it would. But change had never come cheap. He replayed the scene in his head, the mansion, the men, the fear in Michael's voice. His son, his blood looking at him, not with love, but with calculation. And beneath that calculation, something worse, resentment. That was the poison he couldn't name before tonight. When he reached home, the street was empty, except for the hum of neon from the bodega on the corner. He paid the driver, stepped out, and stood under the awning, letting the rain soak his jacket. He didn't rush inside. He just breathed. The air was thick metallic, the kind that carried both endings and beginnings. Inside the house felt smaller than before, but warmer too. Familiar. Real. He took off his coat, hung it beside Elaine's old scarf, and stared at the small family photo still pinned to the refrigerator, him, Elaine, and Michael, before everything fractured. Before ambition became a weapon. He wanted to hate his son. God, he wanted to. But hatred felt too heavy to carry, and somewhere in that weight he could still hear Elaine whisper, "Don't let the world teach you to hate what you made." He poured himself a drink, not for comfort, but for truth, and sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Elaine used to grade papers, humming under her breath. The bourbon burned slow. He let it. Some fires were meant to remind you that you were still alive. He picked up his phone and scrolled through old texts. There were messages from Michael months ago, birthday wishes, short apologies, meaningless updates. And then nothing. Now the screen was empty again, except for the last 2 messages he'd received. You left. Big mistake, Dad. Come back now before things get worse. We just wanted to talk. You misunderstood. Please come back. He deleted them both. The silence that followed was cleaner. Then his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. They're gone. You're safe now. He didn't need to ask who it was. He called. Grace answered on the first ring. Mr. Carter. Her voice sounded smaller, distant, like it was being swallowed by the rain. Where are you? He asked. Bus station, Newark. I'm leaving tonight. You shouldn't, he said. You did the right thing. That doesn't matter to people like them, she said quietly. Right and wrong only exist when the rich agree. He sighed. You could stay here at least for a while. I'll make sure you're safe. Safe, she repeated softly. No one like me is ever safe, Mr. Carter. We just survive in between storms. He swallowed hard. You're not wrong. I'm sorry about your son, she said. I've seen men destroy their families for less. James leaned back, closing his eyes. You ever lose someone to greed, Grace? She hesitated. My brother. He took money from a man who promised him work and never came home. My mother said the devil doesn't always wear horns. Sometimes he wears a suit. James exhaled slowly. Your mother was a smart woman. So was your wife, Grace said softly. I saw her picture on the refrigerator when I cleaned last week. She looked kind. She was, he said, voice low, kind enough to believe people could change. Maybe that's what keeps the world from ending, Grace whispered. People like her. A long silence stretched between them, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then Grace spoke again. What will you do now? Make things right, he said simply. For her. For me. For you. He could almost hear her smile through the phone. Then maybe some good came from all this. Maybe, he said. But not enough. When the call ended, James sat there for a long time listening to the clock tick and the rain tap against the window. He pulled Elaine's photo from his jacket, wiped a drop of water from the glass, and set it in front of him. "You'd have handled this better," he said quietly. "You always did." Later that night, he went through his files, ownership deeds, tax statements, employee lists. He wasn't looking for proof anymore. He was looking for purpose. Each page reminded him that the restaurants weren't just buildings. They were people, men and women who'd stood beside him when no bank would, who'd worked overtime for fair pay, who'd treated his dream like it was their own. If Michael had taken everything, those people would have suffered too. He picked up his pen and began writing letters, one to each manager, each longtime employee. Not form letters, real words, gratitude, clarity, assurance. He promised them protection no matter what storm came next. When he was done, he folded each note carefully and sealed it by hand. Then he poured another drink. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He sighed. "Grace, you really don't need to keep checking on me." But when he looked at the message, his breath stopped. "You think you won, old man? You ruined me. I hope you're proud. Michael." Another message followed immediately. "They'll kill me because of you. You chose them over your own blood." Then a third. "You'll regret this." James stared at the screen, his pulse steady but his eyes burning. He typed slowly, deliberately. "I didn't choose them. I chose truth. You should try it sometime." He hit send, then turned the phone face down. Outside, thunder rolled again, slow and distant, like judgment taking its time. He lifted his glass and looked out the window, watching lightning flicker across the skyline. Maybe this was what justice looked like, not triumph, but survival. And as the first raindrops slid down the glass, he whispered almost to himself, "You can't poison what's already learned how to bleed." It was still raining when James Carter drove back to Montclair. He hadn't planned to, but some storms don't end until you walk straight through them. The wipers beat a steady rhythm across the windshield as the mansion came into view, all white stone and hollow pride, its windows glowing like blind eyes. The same house that had tried to swallow him now stood silent, waiting. He parked on the curb, engine idling. The street was empty except for the soft pulse of red and blue lights reflected in puddles. Police cars. He'd called them an hour earlier, told them everything, the poisoning, the forgery, the debt. Detective Harrison had listened carefully, his voice calm, his tone familiar, with the rhythm of ruined families. "We'll meet you there," the detective had said. "Don't go inside until we arrive." James smiled grimly. "I've been waiting my whole life for permission to walk through a door I already built." Now, as he stepped into the rain, the chill hit him, grounding him. The mansion loomed above its columns, slick and cold. He walked up the driveway, each step deliberate, the rain flattening his hair and soaking his suit. The brass knocker gleamed faintly under the porch light. He didn't knock. He rang the bell. Footsteps. Then silence. Then the door opened. Lauren stood there, mascara running, hair undone. The silk robe was gone, replaced by a cardigan and fear. "James," she breathed, "you shouldn't be here." "I'm starting to hear that a lot," he said. "Where's my son?" She hesitated. "Upstairs. Call him. Please, just go." "The police." "Already called them," he said evenly. "You should probably start rehearsing your version." Something broke in her eyes, not guilt, but panic. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They'll kill him." "Then maybe he should have thought about that before trying to kill me." He brushed past her and stepped inside. The house smelled different now. No perfume, no pot roast, just damp air and fear. Lauren followed him down the hall. "James, please, he's not a bad person." "Bad's too easy a word," James said. "Bad's a man who steals. Evil's a man who calls it love." He found Michael in the study. The room was a mess, papers everywhere, whiskey on the desk, the glow of a half-burned cigarette dying in the ashtray. His son looked smaller than before, like the air itself was crushing him. When he looked up, the old arrogance was gone. "Dad," he said hoarsely, "you shouldn't be here." "I keep hearing that," James replied, closing the door behind him. Michael stood, his hands shaking. They said they'd kill Lauren. They said, "Stop James cut in. Don't insult me with half-truths. You had choices. You always did." Michael's voice cracked. "I was scared. So was I. Every day I built something this world told me I didn't deserve. But I didn't drug my father to make rent." Michael sank back into his chair, covering his face. "I didn't think it would go that far." James leaned forward. "That's the problem, son. You never think far enough." The air hung thick between them, the only sound the rain against the windows. Michael looked up, tears streaking down his face. "You don't know what it's like to be me." "I do," James said softly. "I was you, once. The difference is I stopped blaming the world for my own reflection." Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. "I wanted to be like you." James exhaled long and tired. "Then you should have listened to me." For a moment silence, then footsteps echoed from the hall. Lauren's voice trembled. "They're here." Police lights flashed through the rain-streaked windows. A knock, firm official. James turned to his son. "You know what to do." Michael froze. You're not pressing charges." "I don't have to," James said. "You already sentenced yourself." Detective Harrison entered, first coat-dripping expression unreadable. Behind him, 2 officers followed, moving with quiet efficiency. "Mr. Carter," Harrison said. "You all right?" "Better than last night," James replied. Harrison nodded, then turned to Michael. "Mr. Miller, we'll need you to come with us." Michael didn't resist. He just stood slowly, his face hollow. "You told them everything," James nodded. "Not everything. Just enough to stop you from killing what's left of your soul." Lauren began to cry, a brittle sound that filled the room like glass breaking. "Please, he didn't mean—" The detective's tone stayed professional. "Ma'am, attempted poisoning and fraud aren't accidents." She reached for Michael, but he didn't look back. The officers guided him out the door. For a moment, James caught his son's eyes, dark, broken, pleading. There was no anger left in them, only the quiet realization of what it costs to lose your own reflection. When the police cars disappeared down the street, the house felt even emptier. Lauren stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. James turned to leave, but she spoke. "Do you hate me?" she asked. He paused. "No. Hate's too easy. I pity you." Her voice shook. "You think you're better than me?" He looked back at her, eyes steady. "No, just freer." He stepped out into the rain, the door closing behind him, like the final page of a book that should have ended chapters ago. Later that night, back in Brooklyn, James sat by the window watching lightning split the sky. The streets glistened with truth. He wasn't sure if justice had been done, but justice wasn't the goal anymore. Peace was. His phone buzzed. "Grace." "Did you go back, James?" "Yeah, it's done. Grace." "Are you okay, James?" "Not yet, but I will be." He stared at the words, then typed one more message. "You should come by the restaurant tomorrow. I have something for you." Grace replied after a moment. "You don't owe me anything. James." "Maybe not. But decent people should look out for each other. That's how we stay human." He put the phone down, poured a final drink, and looked toward the photo of Elaine on the counter. Her smile seemed softer tonight, as if approving. The rain eased into drizzle. The world outside was still broken, but somehow inside his small kitchen, something had begun to heal. And as dawn crept up over the skyline, James whispered, "You were right, Elaine. Families do find their way back, just not always the way we hoped." The next morning dawned gray, and still the kind of quiet that only comes after storms have said everything they needed to say. Brooklyn smelled of wet pavement and fresh bread from the bakery down the block. For the first time in days, James Carter woke without the taste of fear in his mouth. But peace was fragile. It came in moments, not permanence. He stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the street stir to life. Kids chasing each other with backpacks, a delivery truck double-parked a woman, arguing softly into her phone. The ordinary rhythm of people trying, surviving, moving on. That's what he wanted now. Not revenge, not even closure, just movement. His phone buzzed. Unknown number again. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Carter said, a calm, professional voice. "Detective Harrison, I thought you'd want to know your son and his wife are in custody. Formal charges: attempted poisoning, fraud, and conspiracy. James didn't move. "Is he all right?" "He's alive," the detective said, shaken. "Keeps asking if you'll press additional charges." "You don't have to decide that now." "I already decided," James said. "He'll face what he's done." "That's enough." There was a pause. "You're a good man, Mr. Carter." Not many fathers could separate justice from vengeance. James let out a low breath. "I've spent too long teaching the difference to forget it now." "Understood. You'll get a call when the arraignment's set." "Thank you," James said and hung up. He stood there for a long moment, phone still in his hand, coffee growing cold. Then he whispered to no one in particular, "It's over, Elaine. He's safe from me, from himself, from everything but time." By afternoon, he was at Carter's Soul and Smoke in Crown Heights. The smell of cornbread ribs and frying oil wrapped around him like a memory that refused to fade. His staff greeted him with cautious smiles, sensing a shift they didn't yet understand. "Morning." "Mr. Carter," said Denise, wiping her hands on her apron. "Heard about your boy on the news. You doing all right?" He nodded. "Doing what needs doing. That's all." She studied him for a beat, then smiled softly. "You look lighter. Different. Maybe that's just what truth weighs once you stop carrying lies," he said half to himself. She chuckled. "That's deep, boss. You should put that on a t-shirt." He laughed, a sound that startled even him. It felt rusty, like something he hadn't used in years. "Maybe I will," he said. At noon, Grace walked in. She wore the same denim jacket as before, the same worn shoes, but her face carried something new, dignity. Not the fragile kind that money buys, but the kind that comes from knowing you did the right thing when no one was watching. James met her at the counter, smile gentle. "You made it." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "Wasn't sure I should come back here." "You should," he said. "Because I've got an offer for you." Her eyebrows lifted. "An offer manager position," he said simply. "Full-time benefits training. You saved my life, Grace. Let me give you something back." She blinked, stunned. "You don't have to." "I know," he interrupted, "but I want to." For a moment neither spoke. Then she smiled, a real smile this time, unguarded and warm. "You sure about this? I've never managed anything but a house that wasn't mine." "That's exactly why I'm sure," James said. "You know how to hold things together that were built to fall apart." Her eyes shimmered. "You sound like my mother." He chuckled. Then she must have been wise. Grace laughed softly, then reached across the counter to shake his hand. Her grip was strong. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." He squeezed back. "Call me James. We've both earned that." Later that evening, as the dinner crowd filled the restaurant, James sat in his office in the back. He opened a small envelope delivered earlier that day by courier. Inside was a handwritten letter from Michael. "Dad. They say prison changes people. I guess I started changing the night you came back. You looked at me like a stranger, and maybe that's what I'd become, a stranger to everything you taught me. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this. But I need you to know Lauren's gone. She took a deal. I'll serve my time. Maybe when I get out, I'll find a way to build something honest. I used to think you were lucky. Now I see you just refuse to sell your soul cheap. I love you even if I never learned how to say it right. Michael." The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clean. James folded the letter carefully, set it in the top drawer, and sat there in silence. He should have felt relief, maybe even pride, but all he felt was a kind of sorrow too old to name. He took out the photo from his wallet again, Elaine and Michael at his restaurant's opening day, their arms around each other. Back then, everything seemed possible. He traced their faces with his thumb. "You got through to him, baby," he whispered. "Took me too long to hear you, but you did." When the restaurant closed, James locked up the register and stepped outside. The night air was warm now, clean after the rain. Across the street, a group of teenagers laughed as they shared fries under the streetlight music thumping from a car radio. Life went on. It always did. Grace came out behind him, keys jangling. "Boss, sorry, James," she corrected, smiling. "You need a ride home." He shook his head. "No. Think I'll walk tonight." She nodded. "See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow," he echoed. As she drove off, he looked up at the night sky. Brooklyn stars faint, but still there, fighting to be seen through light pollution and chaos. The kind of stars you only notice when you stop running long enough to look up. He slipped his hands into his pockets, started down the block, and whispered to himself, "Family doesn't end when blood fails. It ends when kindness does." And for the first time in years, the words didn't hurt. They healed. The news spread quickly. Local headlines read, "Restaurateur's son arrested in family fraud scandal." Beneath it was a photo of Michael being led into court, head bowed, wrists cuffed. James didn't buy the paper, but copies sat on every diner counter in Brooklyn that morning. Even his own restaurant had one by the register folded half-read, whispering shame every time a customer reached for coffee. People looked at him differently now, some with pity, others with respect. But he didn't want either. He wanted quiet. That night, he sat alone in his office at Carter's Soul and Smoke lights, dimmed phones silent. Grace had already gone home after closing, humming softly as she wiped down the tables. The smell of grease and cornbread lingered, the scent of real work, the kind that didn't lie. On his desk lay Michael's letter, folded and refolded until the creases blurred the words. James read it again anyway. He wasn't sure why. Maybe to remind himself that forgiveness didn't have to mean forgetting. The door creaked. Denise peeked in. "You still here, boss?" "Yeah," he said, "just cleaning up." She smiled gently. "You been cleaning up since the day I met you." He chuckled. "Guess I'm just trying to stay ahead of the mess." She stepped closer. "You thinking about him, James?" Didn't pretend. "Every day." Denise nodded. "That's what good fathers do. Even when their kids forget how to be good sons." He looked up, eyes heavy. "You ever forgive somebody who didn't deserve it all the time?" she said. "Sometimes for them, mostly for me." He leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, I know that kind." After she left, James locked up and walked through the empty dining room. The neon sign flickered in the window, Soul and Smoke. He'd chosen that name for a reason. Soul for what fed you. Smoke for what you survived. He flipped the switch, the lights dimming to shadows, then stepped outside. The street was alive again, late-night traffic laughter spilling from a bar down the block, the rhythm of a city that refused to stop breathing. Brooklyn didn't care about his shame. Brooklyn just kept going. And maybe that's what he needed to do too. The next morning, he found Grace already at work, apron-tied sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back. She was scrubbing the kitchen tile, humming the same hymn he remembered his mother singing when life got too heavy to carry alone. "Morning," he said. She glanced up, smiling. "You're early. So are you." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that house. You and me both," he said. Then softly, "But you did the right thing." "I did what I could." She said, "You did the right thing." He tilted his head. "How you figure? You didn't let hate finish what greed started," she said simply. "That's what makes you different." James chuckled quietly. "Difference don't pay much these days." Grace smiled. "Then we'll just make honesty profitable." They shared a laugh that broke something heavy between them. Later that week, a letter arrived from the court, Michael's arraignment scheduled for the end of the month. James stared at the date circled in red and whispered, "Maybe this is where it turns." He didn't know if he meant for his son or for himself. That night, he dreamed of Elaine. She stood behind the counter at the first restaurant they ever owned, the one on Nostrand Avenue that had smelled of wood smoke and hope. She was laughing, apron dusted with flour, eyes glowing like the first time he saw her. When she spoke, her voice sounded exactly as he remembered. "You did what you had to, James. That's all love is, really. Doing what's right when it hurts." He woke with tears on his pillow and a kind of peace that felt foreign but welcome. The next day, Grace joined him for lunch at a corner table near the window. The noon crowd bustled around them, workers, students, families, real people. She pushed her plate away full. "You feed the soul, Mr. Carter." He smiled. "That's the goal. I heard one of the customers call you a hero," she said. He laughed softly. "Heroes don't lose sleep. Heroes don't wish things turned out different." She studied him for a moment. Maybe heroes are just the ones who survive their own mistakes. He looked out the window, the sunlight glinting off parked cars. "You ever think survival's just another word for unfinished work?" "Maybe," she said. "But sometimes unfinished work is the best kind. Means you're still here to fix it." That night after closing, they walked out together. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks. Stars pricked through the haze like stubborn truths refusing to stay buried. Grace looked up. Haven't seen stars this bright since I left Lagos. He smiled. Funny. I haven't seen 'em this bright since I started looking down. They stood there in silence for a while, the city humming around them, sirens, laughter jazz from a car radio drifting through the air. James, she said finally, why didn't you hate him? He thought for a long time before answering. Because hate's a cage, and I already spent half my life breaking out of one. She nodded slowly. Then what now? He smiled. Now we build something better, not perfect, just honest. Grace grinned. That's enough. As he walked home, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement, turning the streets into rivers of color. Each step echoed a little lighter than the last. When he reached his front porch, he looked up at the dark windows and whispered, "We made it, Elaine. Not whole, but home." Inside, the kitchen clock ticked steadily, no longer mocking him, but keeping time with him. He sat down at the table, poured a small glass of bourbon, and raised it to the photograph of his wife on the counter. "To truth," he said softly, "and to the people who still believe in it." The rain didn't fall that night. But somewhere deep in Brooklyn, a man who had lost almost everything finally found peace, not in wealth or forgiveness or even justice, just in knowing that after everything, his soul was still clean. Spring came slowly that year. The trees along Flatbush Avenue bloomed shyly, their pink petals brushing against cracked sidewalks and graffiti-scarred walls. Brooklyn was waking up again, and so was James Carter. 3 months had passed since the trial. Michael had pleaded guilty. Lauren had turned state's witness. The papers called it a story of greed and grace, but James didn't read the papers anymore. He didn't need to. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was about what came next. He stood in front of his newest restaurant, a quiet spot on Bedford called Elaine's Table. The sign wasn't big or fancy, but the name felt right, soft, honest, unshakable. Grace stood beside him, clipboard in hand, her hair tucked under a scarf. "You sure about this name?" she teased. "You're going to make all the other wives jealous." He smiled. "Let 'em be. Elaine earned this one." They pushed open the doors together. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the faint aroma of hickory wood. The tables gleamed under the morning light. No marble, no chandeliers, just warmth. A space made for people who didn't need to prove they belonged. "Looks good," Grace said, surveying the room. "Feels good." "Good's enough for me," James replied. "Perfection costs too much." By noon, the first staff meeting began. Most were people James had known for years, cooks, dishwashers, servers who'd been with him through every rise and fall. But there were new faces, too. A young single mother from the Bronx, a Haitian refugee studying hospitality at night school, a quiet Dominican kid who'd walked 5 miles just to drop off his resume. James looked at them all and said, "This place isn't about profit. It's about purpose. We feed people who work for a living. We feed people who don't always get fed. If you want fancy, you're in the wrong kitchen. If you want family, welcome home." Applause broke out. Grace wiped at her eyes, pretending to fix her scarf. When the meeting ended, James walked the line with his head chef Marco. The kitchen buzzed with life pots clanging laughter, rising above the sound of sizzling oil. It wasn't the sound of success. It was the sound of survival sharpened into joy. That night, after closing, James and Grace sat outside the restaurant sharing takeout from paper boxes. The city hummed around them, sirens in the distance, a saxophone spilling from an open window, the eternal pulse of Brooklyn refusing to die. Grace looked thoughtful. "You ever think about going to see him?" James didn't ask who she meant. "Every day. So why haven't you?" He stirred his rice, thinking. "Because I don't know what I'd say." "Maybe you don't need to say anything," she said gently. "Maybe just showing up's enough." He nodded slowly. "Maybe." The truth was, he'd received 3 letters from Michael since sentencing short, careful, trying too hard to sound changed. He'd read them all. He just hadn't answered yet. Forgiveness was simple when it was hypothetical. Harder when it had a face. The next week, Grace introduced a new menu item, freedom pie. Sweet potato crust, spiced apple filling, and a caramel glaze that made the whole room smell like home. When James asked about the name, she shrugged. Because freedom should taste good, she said. It became the restaurant's signature dish. Customers lined up for it, not just for the flavor, but for what it represented. Word spread fast, a Black-owned restaurant named for a lost wife, managed by an African immigrant who once had nothing but courage. The neighborhood embraced them. Local churches ordered catering. Journalists stopped by for interviews. James declined most of them, except one. The reporter was young, nervous, and earnest. "Mr. Carter," she said, setting her recorder on the table, "your stories inspired a lot of people. What do you think is the biggest lesson from all this?" James leaned back, arms crossed, eyes calm. "That dignity's the only inheritance worth leaving behind." The reporter smiled softly. "And your son?" He paused. "Still my son," he said finally. "That's lesson number 2. Weeks later, a letter arrived, no stamp, no postmark, hand-delivered by a correctional officer. Inside a single line in Michael's handwriting, visiting day, Saturday, noon. James stared at it for a long time. Then he folded it, tucked it into his pocket, and went to work. That Saturday, he wore a simple gray suit, the same one from the night everything had fallen apart. He drove to the correctional facility outside Newark, the sky heavy with summer heat. Inside, the air was thick with disinfectant and echoes. Guards scanned him, stamped his wrist, and led him to a row of plastic chairs separated by a pane of glass. Michael was already there. He looked older, thinner, quieter, but something in his eyes had shifted. Not guilt, not pride, just exhaustion with pretending. They picked up the phones on either side of the glass. "Hey," Michael said, voice cracking. "Hey," James answered. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Michael said, "I heard you opened a new place." "Elaine's Table." "Yeah," James said. "Thought you'd approve." Michael smiled faintly. "She'd be proud. She'd want you to eat better than prison food." Michael laughed weakly. "Guess that's true." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't cruel either. It was the silence of rebuilding something that used to matter. Before leaving, Michael pressed his hand to the glass. "I'm sorry, Dad." James looked at the trembling hand, then slowly lifted his own, pressing it against the other side. "I know, son," he said. "Just don't let sorry be the only thing you build." When he walked out into the sunlight, the air felt cleaner. That evening, Grace found him sitting outside the restaurant looking up at the stars. "How'd it go?" He smiled faintly. "Better than it started." She nodded. "Sometimes healing looks quiet. Sometimes it looks like pie," he said, gesturing to the slice she brought out. They both laughed. As the streetlights flickered on and the city exhaled another long day, James took a bite of the pie and whispered to himself, "Tastes like freedom." The letter came on a Tuesday. It was early autumn, the air crisp, the leaves along Eastern Parkway turning bronze. James had just opened the restaurant when Denise handed him an envelope. Her brow furrowed. "From the prison," she said softly. "You want me to toss it?" He looked at the handwriting, uneven, familiar. "No," he said. "I'll read it." He waited until the lunch rush ended, until the clatter of dishes faded, and the staff's laughter quieted. Then he sat in the back office, the same one that still smelled faintly of smoke and spice, and opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper. No envelope scent, no perfume, no signature flourish, just the clean, sharp honesty of prison stationery. "Dad, it's been 6 months. The food here tastes like regret, and the walls sound like excuses. You were right. Prison doesn't make men better. It just makes them honest. Every night I think about that dinner, about how you looked at me when you realized what I'd done. It wasn't anger I saw. It was disappointment. I think that's worse. Lauren filed for divorce last month, said she needed a fresh start. I guess betrayal's easier when you're used to it. I don't blame her anymore. Maybe we both got what we earned. I've been helping in the prison kitchen. Funny, huh? Guess the apple didn't fall far from the stove. They let me work the morning shift, cornbread, eggs, whatever passes for breakfast in here. I taught a guy named Ray how to season food without salt. He calls me chef. You once said a man's worth is in what he builds, not what he breaks. I didn't understand that then. I do now. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to thank you for walking away that night instead of letting me destroy you. You saved me by letting me fall." Michael James folded the letter carefully, then unfolded it again, reading it a second time. Then a third. Each word felt like a small redemption stitched to a wound that would never quite close. He leaned back, eyes burning, and whispered to the ceiling, "He's learning, Elaine. Slowly, but he's learning." That evening, Grace found him on the back steps, letter in hand, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised gold and lavender. She sat beside him without asking permission. "You look like a man with too many thoughts," she said. He handed her the letter silently. She read it once carefully, then folded it again. "That's not a bad letter." "No," James said, "it's not." "You gonna write back? I don't know what to say." "Say what you would have wanted your father to tell you," she said simply. He smiled faintly. "My father never wrote letters. He wrote lessons, most of them with silence." Grace chuckled. "Then break the pattern." He stared out at the street, the glow of passing cars sliding across his face. Maybe that's what this whole thing's about, breaking the pattern. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, James sat at the counter under the soft hum of the neon sign. He took out a fresh sheet of paper. His hand shook slightly, not from age, but from memory. He began to write. "Son, I got your letter. You sound like a man who's finally listening to himself. That's the first step to becoming one. I don't care what you've lost. I care what you build next. You'll find that most people spend their lives trying to buy forgiveness when all they really need is humility. Cooking saved my life, too. Maybe it'll do the same for you. When you stir that pot, remember, everything burns if you stop paying attention. Elaine used to say people don't change. They grow into who they already were. You were never bad, Michael. Just blind. Keep your eyes open this time. Dad." He set the pen down and read the words over once. Then he folded the letter, neatly sealed it, and placed it on the counter beside the register. Grace would mail it tomorrow. For the first time in a long time, he felt no anger, no ache, just the quiet peace of finally saying what needed to be said. The next morning, business was slow, the kind of slow that lets you breathe. A jazz record spun softly in the background. Grace brewed coffee while James stood by the front window, watching the first few customers trickle in. An elderly couple sat by the window. A young construction worker ordered to go. A mother fed her little boy pancakes while humming under her breath. Ordinary moments, perfect in their simplicity. Grace joined him at the window, drying her hands on her apron. "You mailed it?" He nodded. "First thing. You feel better?" "I feel lighter," he said. The first cold winds of autumn swept through Brooklyn, curling down the narrow streets and rattling the windows of Elaine's table. The restaurant glowed warm against the chill, filled with laughter gospel on the radio, and the smell of cornbread baking in the oven. James Carter sat at his corner table reading the mail that Grace had just brought in. Bills supply invoices, a catering request from a local church, and one envelope that wasn't like the rest. The handwriting stopped him cold. He turned it over once, then again. New Jersey State Correctional Facility, Michael. He sat there for a long time staring at it. Grace, noticing the change in his face, approached quietly. "You okay?" He nodded, but his voice came out rough. "Yeah, just a letter from an old ghost." She understood immediately. "You want me to give you space?" "No," he said. "Stay. Might be good to have someone else remember it, too." Grace sat across from him, folding her hands. "Then open it." He tore the envelope gently as if the paper might bruise. Inside was a single page written carefully in blue ink. "Dad, they tell us the air here smells like bleach because it keeps disease away. But sometimes I swear I can still smell your kitchen, the ribs, the smoke, the sauce burning just enough to make it perfect. It makes me hungrier than I deserve to be. I keep thinking about that night, the way you looked at me. Not angry, just tired. I thought I'd lost everything, but now I know the truth. I'd been losing it for years, piece by piece. Every time I lied, every time I tried to prove I was better than the man who raised me, I was cutting off something I couldn't get back. I don't expect you to forgive me. Hell, I wouldn't. But if you ever do, I want you to know I'm trying. I joined the kitchen program here, been cooking 6 months now. They call me Chef Mike, not because I'm good, but because I show up. Every day, You once told me food is the only language that can tell the truth. I didn't understand that then. I do now. Tell Grace thank you. Tell her I think about what she did, the risk she took, and I hope she finds peace in knowing she saved more than one life that night. And Dad, if I ever get out, I don't want your money. I don't even want your name. I just want a chance to earn your respect the way you earned mine. Love, Michael. The words blurred for a second before James realized he was crying. Not loud tears, just quiet ones like rain sliding down glass. Grace reached out, her voice soft. That's a good letter. He nodded. Yeah, it's a start. He's changing, she said. People don't write like that unless they mean it. He folded the letter carefully, pressing it between his palms. Maybe prison taught him what freedom couldn't. Grace smiled faintly. You gonna write him back? He looked out the window at the streetlights flickering through the early dusk. Yeah, but not tonight. Tonight, I just want to remember who we used to be before the world got loud. Later, when the restaurant closed, James stayed behind. The city had quieted to a hum. He sat at the counter, letter beside his drink notebook open. He didn't write right away, just thought. About legacy. About how pain doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it's just the tuition for wisdom. When he finally began to write, the words came slowly but clean. Son, I read your letter twice. Once as a father, once as a man. The father in me grieves for what we lost. The man in me is proud of what you're becoming. Cooking saved my life too, you know. Back when no one would hire a man who looked like me, I built a kitchen out of borrowed pans and faith. Maybe that's our bloodline. Not wealth, not property, but survival through creation. You don't have to earn my respect, son. You just have to keep showing up. Do the work. Feed people. Feed yourself. That's how you stay human. Love, Dad. When he finished, he folded the page and slipped it into an envelope. He sealed it with a sigh that carried 20 years of weight. Grace reappeared in the doorway, coat on purse over her shoulder. Writing him back, she asked softly. He nodded. Just finished. She smiled. Elaine would have liked that. He glanced at her. You ever think about how strange it is? The people we lose keep finding ways to talk through the ones who stay. Grace stepped closer. That's not strange, James. That's faith. He smiled faintly. Guess she left more of it behind than I realized. The next day, Grace mailed the letter herself. A week later, they received one in return, not from Michael, but from the prison chaplain. Mr. Carter, your son read your letter aloud in group counseling today. Said it was the first time in years he believed he could be something other than what he'd done. He asked me to tell you that he's saving every letter, every word. He's teaching other inmates how to cook. He said, if food can change me, maybe it can change them too. When Grace finished reading, her voice broke. He's becoming you. James smiled through his tears. Then maybe I did something right after all. That night, the restaurant was busier than ever. People laughed, clinked glasses, and shared slices of freedom pie. James moved among the tables, shaking hands, checking plates, refilling coffee like the rhythm of his own heartbeat. When he paused at the window, he saw his reflection, older, grayer, but whole. Not a survivor, not a victim. A man who'd finally made peace with the ghosts that raised him. He whispered to the glass, You were right, Elaine. Love doesn't end, it just changes uniforms. Grace came up behind him with a smile. Talking to yourself again, he chuckled. Talking to someone who listens better than most. They laughed, the kind of laughter that doesn't erase pain, but reminds you you're still allowed to feel joy. And for the first time in years, James Carter didn't feel haunted. He felt home. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the rooftops of Brooklyn like powdered sugar, and the city moved slower beneath its quiet weight. But inside Elaine's table, warmth bloomed from every corner. Laughter music, the smell of collard greens, and apple pie. James Carter stood by the window, arms folded, watching snowflakes melt against the glass. The restaurant was full. Every table taken. The kind of night Elaine used to dream about. Grace approached from behind, carrying a tray of steaming plates. You're staring again, she teased. You gonna charge extra for all this nostalgia? He smiled, just making sure the view still looks honest. "It does," she said. "You built that." "No," he corrected softly. "We built it." Grace set the tray down and joined him at the window. Outside, 2 kids were helping their mother push a grocery cart through the snow, laughing as they slipped and fell. He smiled faintly. "That was me and Michael once, back when the world still felt simple." Grace's voice softened. "Maybe it still is. We just make it complicated." He nodded slowly. "Maybe." A soft bell rang above the door. The cold wind swept in a man in a wool coat and beanie stamping snow from his boots. When James looked up, his breath caught. Michael. He was thinner, older, but there was light in his eyes again. Freedom looked good on him, not loud, not boastful, just quiet and earned. The room hushed for a moment as customers recognized him from the papers. But James raised a hand, calm and steady. "It's all right," he said. "That's my son." Michael managed a smile. "Hey, Dad." Grace appeared beside them, eyes shining. "Well, if it isn't Chef Mike." Michael chuckled nervously. "Still cooking. Just with better ingredients now." James nodded toward a corner booth. "Sit. Let's talk." They slid into the booth by the window where the world outside shimmered white under the street lights. Grace poured 2 coffees and slipped away, giving them space. For a while neither spoke. The silence wasn't tense, just fragile like the pause between 2 verses of a song that had taken years to finish. Finally, James said, "You look good." "Prison food wasn't great for the waistline," Michael said with a weak grin. "But I'm eating again. Cooking, too," I heard James said. "The chaplain sent me a letter." Michael nodded. "They let me work with kids now, juvenile center, teach them basic cooking. Some of them remind me of myself." James smiled faintly. "Then teach them better than I taught you." "You taught me enough," Michael said. I just stopped listening. They fell quiet again, the kind of silence that didn't need to apologize for existing. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, fading quickly into the hum of the city. "I don't expect us to be what we were," Michael said finally, "but I'd like to try to be something new." James studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Something new sounds good." Grace returned with 2 plates of sweet potato pie. "Peace offering," she said with a wink. Michael laughed. "Freedom pie. The one and only," she said. "On the house." When she walked away, Michael took a bite and closed his eyes. "You ever notice he said how the best things in life come from leftovers? Sweet potatoes, cornbread, love." James chuckled. "Survival's always been our best recipe." They ate in silence, each bite a small act of forgiveness. The kind you don't speak out loud because words would only cheapen it. After a while, Michael leaned back, exhaling. "I don't deserve this, Dad." "No," James said. "But neither did I when my father gave me another chance." Michael blinked. "You never told me about him." James smiled. "Not much to tell. Just a man who worked himself to the bone and thought silence was love. Guess I broke that cycle a little late." Michael nodded slowly. "Maybe we both did." Later that night after Michael left, James stood at the door watching the snow fall harder. Grace joined him again, 2 mugs of coffee in her hands. "He'll be back," she said. "I know," James replied. "He means it, James. He's trying." He nodded. "So am I." Grace sipped her coffee. "You ever think Elaine would be proud?" James looked out at the snow-covered street, where laughter echoed faintly from the corner. "I think she's proud of all of us, even the broken parts." They stood there for a while, letting the warmth of the coffee fight the chill in the air. The neon sign above the window flickered, then steadied. Elaine's table glowed like a heartbeat against the dark. When closing time came, James walked through the empty dining room, fingers tracing the edge of each table. Every scratch, every stain told a story. People who'd eaten laughed, cried, remembered. This was what legacy looked like. Not marble floors or million-dollar homes, just a place where no one had to pretend. He paused at the last table and whispered, "We made it, baby. Not perfect, but together." Then he turned off the lights. The next morning he woke before sunrise and drove to the pier near Red Hook, a place he and Elaine used to walk when money was tight, but love was full. The air was cold enough to bite, but he didn't mind. He sat on a bench watching the first light crawl over the water. In his pocket was a small envelope addressed to Michael. Inside was a single note. "Son, This is yours one day, not the business, the table. The one we keep setting no matter who sits at it. Keep feeding people, and you'll never go hungry again. Love, Dad." He smiled, folded the note back into his pocket, and whispered into the wind, "Looks like we finally learned how to stay full." The horizon glowed gold, the city waking behind him. Somewhere a church bell rang. And as the sun broke through the clouds, James Carter closed his eyes, breathed in the cold air, and felt the truth settle deep in his chest. Redemption didn't come from punishment. It came from persistence, from showing up even when no one believed you still could.